So when we were looking back at what we've done throughout the class, we kind of realized that a common theme in this class has been virtual reality through vision, which makes sense because this is how a lot of how we experience the world around us. So just a few examples from class. We have the camera Obscura, you know, a darkened box as a whole where an image is projected, flipped onto the opposite wall, which was an important development in photography. We have the stereoscope, which, you know, plays off binocular vision and involves two photos strategically placed at different angles that when viewed together can create an impression of depth. And then here we have, you know, the Mondo Nuovo, which kind of just represents a lot of concepts we've learned throughout the class about vision, you know, linear perspective, and we also talked about motion parallax. So we kind of realized that we focused on vision a lot throughout this class, but it led us to wonder, why is this, and is sight necessary in a virtual reality experience? Our idea was we would have a no vision condition where subjects would go into a completely dark box, and we would stimulate all of their senses except for sight with a lot of technology that Ivy will go into in a second, but take away the vision component. And we would make them, we would choose an environment. An example is like a beach where they could, you know, smell the smells of like the salty air and feel the wind on their face and hear the waves and whatnot. And they would be in there for a certain amount of time. And then we would add a visual component. So we could have screens that would light up on each of the walls, and they would experience that for a certain amount of time. So they could compare the two conditions. And then finally, we would have them fill out a questionnaire at the end to just kind of gauge their subjective experiences and how they felt it went.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. So essentially, this is the design of our experimental art exhibition. So we'll be having a box that uses cave technology, and what exactly that is, we'll explain later on in this presentation. But essentially, it will be a 10 by 10 foot room with 4 walls and a floor. So essentially, very much like the image you see on the left there, with just one extra standing wall. And it will receive one user at a time who will be standing in the center of the room, and it will they will stay there. They're fixed. And as Catherine was saying, the default setting of our choosing is the beach. So next slide, please. And again, like Catherine was saying, to test the importance of sight in a virtual reality environment, the first 4 minutes will be completely without any visual information. Then afterwards, images will be lit up, and so the users can have 2 conditions to compare and contrast. Next slide. And first we want to go into the sound component. We'll be using 3D audio, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's just audio that goes in like a 360, like all around you, kind of like surrounding. Because in real live, sound doesn't just come from like 1 or 2 channels. It comes from whichever sound source it is localized.
My final project was more focused on the use of auditory imagination in VR as opposed to visual aspects of it. I came up with the hypothesis that the magnitude of immersion correlates with the amount of imagination required to fill in the gaps of the virtual reality, meaning the more imagination is required, the less immersive an experience is. And I decided to focus on auditory imagination since we've talked a lot about the visual aspects of immersion like vanishing point and motion parallax, but not the auditory ones. So according to my hypothesis, a view of the outdoors combined with outdoor sound would be more immersive than just the view of the outdoors with no sound, because with the sound, you don't have to use your imagination to fill in the auditory stimulus of the virtual space yourself. For the actual experiment, I made my own DIY virtual reality headset made out of my iPhone and Bluetooth speaker taped onto a cardboard box with a cutout window for the iPhone screen. And because I was using a YouTube video, but really more because of how fragile the whole thing was, the image wouldn't move as you looked around, but the trees moved around in the wind in the video, so there was actual motion provided in the video. And I also chose not to cut out a space for the speaker on the cardboard because the way the speaker's sound traveled through the cardboard almost made it seem like the sound was actually coming from outside of the window, which was cool. I was actually kind of impressed how immersive this low-cost VR was.
The title of my project is See You Real Soon, which is a dual meaning. So it is both Mickey Mouse's catchphrase, but I also think it includes two words relevant to the course material: see for the human perception component and real for the reality element. So as you walk through the entrance of Magic Kingdom in Orlando, Florida, there's a sign like this one, or it is this one, that states, "Here you leave today and enter the world of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy." And I believe that at Walt Disney World, visitors are fully immersed in environments that otherwise are not feasible. And through simulation, they're transported to this utopian society where they become part of a story. So the goal of my project was to argue how I believe Disney creates this immersive experience. And I think it's in three main ways. So through enhancing aspects of reality through simulation, by transforming fiction into reality, and by creating illusions. And together, these components contribute to an immersive experience that in some ways could appear more real than reality. So in my project, I drew connections between the course material and Walt Disney World with the goal of demonstrating how Disney uses the techniques that we saw in the course in order to create an immersive experience through simulation and illusion. And what I do is I provide examples that relate topics from the course to specific examples in Walt Disney World through this visual slideshow. And I also have a corresponding document that goes into a bit more explanation since I will not be able, I have too much information to do in this presentation. So here's the first example of relating things from class to this project. So virtual travel is something that we talked about. We saw in Letter from an Unknown Woman, the video clip where there's like a slide traveling behind the two actors there, and it's as if they're traveling. Italy in Virtual Reality is an example. It's a YouTube channel where you can go and travel through Italy without leaving your laptop. And Italian Shadow, so this is Professor Massimo Riva's project, which we've read some excerpts from and seen a little bit of throughout the class. So here's some pictures from Epcot World Showcase that I talked about. So here's 6 of the 11 countries. You can see that the architecture is really designed so that you wouldn't have a doubt of where this was in the world. There are restaurants, there are shops, there's music playing as you walk through. You can go eat the food of the country. And so in some ways it seems more, some aspects are more emphasized because they're trying to convince you that you're in that country by simulating it in a way. So here are 2 pieces of art that Brent Wall created. Arrivals and Departures. There's a video created from these trees that are physical. So creating media from physical. And same thing with Love Note on the right. This, I believe he said, was his daughter's hair, a picture of it. And so he creates this art from a physical object. On the other side of that, Disney creates physical from media. So Star Wars, they've created Galaxy's Edge. So it's creating a land based on a whole media franchise. Some Disney films, they recreate certain areas of the parks to resemble the films and bring them to life, as well as the Twilight Zone. There's a ride based off of the Twilight Zone TV show. And then storytelling with technology is at the forefront of what Disney does. And I'll just go quickly through that. So the last way that I believe Disney creates this immersive experience is through illusion. One of them being perspective. So perspective being the changing of image size with distance. Linear perspective we've seen throughout the course, but Disney uses something called forced perspective, which is in a way a physical extension of linear perspective. So here are some examples we've seen over and over of linear perspective. So Brunelleschi's Experiment, 2 paintings we talked about in class. In forced perspective, I talked about this a little bit, but you can really see it on that left side, the Beast Castle. It looks like it's far off in the distance, like a full-size castle. But then when you look at a picture of a man next to it, you can see how short the door really is, the windows are, to give that appearance of it being larger than it is. And this also is seen on Main Street and Cinderella's Castle.
I'm going to talk a little bit about story-focused hyperreality and how Walt Disney Imagineering uses hyperreality and uses story to generate instances of hyperreality. So here we go. As a brief case study, I want to talk about Pandora, the world of Avatar. Nothing more completely represents the Disney way of placemaking than this alien moon of Pandora, which is based on James Cameron's Avatar. It's a lush, natural landscape that's truly breathtaking, thanks to the story that guides its creation. The land is set hundreds of years after the events of Avatar, after the evil RDA has ceded its colonized land back to the native Na'vi. You visit the Valley of Moara, which is a national park that you're visiting, with the sponsorship of the fictional tourism company Alpha Centauri Expeditions. There you go. You're a tourist in this story. That's easy for you to imagine because you're a tourist visiting Disney's Animal Kingdom. And so the notion of visiting a place to see natural wonder is something that's relatable to you. And all 5 senses are on display in the Valley of Moara, from the beautiful, breathtaking Hallelujah Mountains. Those mountains, by the way, is actually a big architectural arch. And those vines that look like they're just draping down are actually steel beams holding it all together. The bioluminescence that it has at night. You can smell cool plant life. You hear different animal noises based on the time of day. And you can feel the plants and the texture of the plants and the things that the Na'vi have created. I want to talk about the panorama and how Walt Disney sought to create a video analog to the panorama called Circle Vision 360 and used an array of 7 cameras mounted to a car to record the beauty of America's landscapes, among other things. There was one technical fault that prevented true immersion, well, 2, but one of them was the black bars in between the different screens. The other was camera shake as it mounted on the video. Now that was iterated on as we continued to the 21st century with Soren. We dangled a camera array below a helicopter, and that was able to move around and record things that are seamless. It still had local parallax kind of warping, and software has been used to fix that. But let's now talk about windows onto a world in a Bernaleschi style way. To make that believable, we want that to be a video analog, so we're not just looking at an image. And Disney first achieved this with their trackless dark ride Ratatouille in Disneyland Paris. They used the 3D animation effects of Pixar to help them. So Ratatouille is a trackless ride, and the rider is the size of a rat, and larger than life action is happening all around you. And that's projected on IMAX screens. But an IMAX screen is 2D, and you want to make it look 3D. And so they did a parallax effect. So here's a couple screenshots from the video. And so at this time, your vehicle is moving to the left, and you can see how everything starts distorted, but then becomes more into focus as the vanishing point and the eye point of your viewer is moving in the image here. And the crazy thing is they have to do it on an average of 3 vehicles, because there's actually 3 vehicles in a platoon here. And so they have to kind of average out where the eye point should be and where the vanishing point should be, and they move it as you move through the scene. And so in conclusion, to create a truly hyper-realistic experience, a creator has to cede to their viewer that his creation is fake. But once that's been admitted, you have to work tirelessly to ensure that all aspects of the creation feel real. And Walt Disney Imagineering discovered this kind of accidentally through their focus on story based on their filmmaking background, but their willingness to adapt new technology to tirelessly get these small details right and adhering to a story to provide answers to all the questions to make sure they can create this truly real environment is what makes them create realistic, hyper-realistic experiences.
Our project is titled Juxtaposing Reality.
So we kind of wanted to explore this idea of like expanding and challenging and complicating 2D and 3D realities and see what the outcome would be.
And our project basically consists of 2 parts. In the first part, we review some current artwork and effort under this theme of juxtaposing reality. And we discover and reach out to the creators of 4 projects that we're gonna present in a minute. And all of them actually responded to us, which we were really happy about. And we conducted interviews either through email or through Zoom. And we asked questions along the line of like, what's the process of creating these photos and what were their goals and motivation behind their project. And as a second part of the project, we actually created our own art pieces, which we are also going to show later in this presentation. So this first artist that we discovered and reached out to, her name is Chino Otsuka. And she is a visual artist born in Tokyo, Japan, and now works and lives in London. Her project is called Imagine Finding Me. And basically in this project, as you can see in this picture, it's actually not a picture of an adult woman and a girl, but it was the adult Chino herself and a younger, the younger her. So she basically superimposed herself onto this old images to create the illusion that she is hanging out with her younger self. So we thought this really aligned well with our theme because she is exploring her own past to juxtaposing these two realities. And like these are really, really amazing work. Like when I first saw this, I had no idea that this was like digitally manipulated. And the artist herself said that the digital process becomes a tool, almost like a time machine, as I'm embarking on the journey to where I once belonged, and at the same time becoming a tourist in my own history.
And lastly, we reached out to Mike Kohia and Raymond Booty. Only Raymond responded, but basically Mike Kohia is the person who came up with the idea of doing Brown Then, Now, and Forever, which was taking pictures of old pictures from the Brown archive and laying them on top of the actual site itself. And Mike is a visual storyteller and photojournalist who's based in Providence. And Raymond is a senior library specialist who's been working at Brown since 1989. And this picture is also cool because it's like, apparently the arm doesn't exist anymore. I didn't know that. I never really pay attention to the statue.
I wonder what happened.
Yeah, we collected photographs from our own personal albums. So this is us back in the old days. So we took pictures from our freshman, sophomore, and junior years, and we found those locations and went around campus to take pictures of those places again.
It's kind of the process we printed out in the only color printer that we can access, which is in Pratt Robinson, and we started at Fonz, walk around campus, and so this is kind of, we're both graduating seniors, and this original picture was, what's it called, convocation. So when we actually enter Van Vico gates 4 years ago, and now the gate is closed and probably will be closed for another year. But we kind of artificially opened the gates through overlaying this picture that when we enter Brown.
And this is special because this is from Campus Dance 2019, which we will never get to have, but yeah, it's okay.
I wanted to focus on virtual travel, and then in the context of French Indochina, because I wanted to see the effects, how the effects of travel were achieved before contemporary technologies like VR were invented and introduced. And I'm also trying to demonstrate how photography, postcards, and letters were used not just to represent, but also to kind of construct a new reality in the minds of different people. This was the first stereoscope that was taken of Vietnamese people. And you can see that they're like very static and as though they're like positioned to pose for the camera. But the camera itself was like also a very Western invention that like people here had not been used to, and therefore they were not as familiar with it as people in the West who would like normally kind of pose or like smile in front of photos. And this is a stereoscope from the personal archives of a Dutch merchant who moved to Hanoi. Here you can see a Vietnamese babysitter who's tending to his baby. And because these postcards also worked as letters and stories, we could also see like the translations and the messages that the people wrote to their loved ones back home. And if, for example, in here, like you can see that the writer said, commenting on the women, no form and no color, like nothing beautiful about her. And while sending this to his lover back home in France. And here's another card in which they photograph the practice of tattooing with like single sticks with like and a bamboo needle, with a bamboo and like a single needle, sorry. And yeah, they're also trying to represent that local people are very disciplined and they're kind of accepting and they kind of want their bodies to be decorated with tattoos in this fashion.
So this is a panoramic image, and you can imagine that on the right side and the left side, the image actually folds around and connects, and also on the top and the bottom. So the viewer would be in the center of a sphere of this image, if that makes sense. So this is an example of the room that's rendered with texture, color, and lighting that's supposed to be realistic. And then the next one is an example of the same room with just shading. And here's the condition of the empty room, which we would say has less visual interest when you're actually exploring the environment because there isn't much to look at, but still a high level of realism. And then this is like probably the worst condition where there's no visual interest or realism. So we're expecting low immersion.
In class a couple weeks ago when we were talking about our proposals, I planned on doing this camera Obscura demo because I definitely want to create something for our final project, but obviously now that we're all home, I didn't know how like I can create something immersive for the class. But then I decided on camera Obscura. Here's just first a little like time lapse of me creating it, not too interesting, but I'm just basically in my room and I'm covering the window. I have 3 windows in my room. I'm just covering one window up with black trash bags or black paper, anything really dark that will not allow light to come through is best. Tape it all the way down. And then in this, I'm just hanging up the white sheet because I didn't really have a wall that was like uncluttered to like project this scene onto. So this is just me kind of struggling a little bit with the white sheet. And yeah, I had my parents and my brother come to my room to like kind of give their reactions, and I had them sit in the room for about like 10-15 minutes and like talk all the different feelings they express. So one of the things mostly coming from my parents was disbelief. I like to attribute that to like the fact that like they're always going to be supportive of things I'm doing for school, but they were just really shocked about like that the tree from outside was like being projected into my room. I think for them also, they didn't really know what camera Obscura was, so that was a really cool like just for them to see. Obviously there was like a lot of joy. They were all pretty happy about seeing this. I think one of the emotions that expressed that was interesting was fear. And I also felt a little bit of this too. At one point it got really dark when I was sitting in the room and it felt really eerie. It felt a little creepy, especially seeing like the trees and the branches like swaying in the wind and the wind around me. So like, I wasn't really scared, but it was just like this like uneasy feeling. My mom got a little scared though, and she wanted to leave. But so that that feeling was expressed, but also this like feeling of serenity and calmness was something we all expressed that we were feeling once you sit there for a while, and once your eyes start adjusting to the darkness, and you start to see the image kind of come to life. You feel like all of these like emotions, like disbelief, joy, like fear, but then you suddenly then come to this like feeling of calmness. And so I'd say I ordered these feelings based on kind of like the order in which you feel them.
I would be talking a bit about a potential art exhibit myself, known as, in my mind, or I'll be naming it the Reality Cyclorama. A quick overview, I'll be talking about the background and the history of the Cyclorama as it relates to my project. I'll talk about some main ideas and the methodology of my project. I'll go ahead and show you some of the drawings and sketches I have of this art exhibit and go over conclusions. So we've talked a bit about the Cyclorama, the 360-degree circular panoramic painting. It was invented in Edinburgh in 1787 by Robert Barker. This first cyclorama depicted a view of the city of Edinburgh. So these large artworks are typically painted on canvas, depicting scenes in this true perspective. And they actually became popular public attractions.